All right, well, today is the Sixth Commandment. So if we review the commandments, first of all, we have the first one, which is about no other gods. The second one, which is about revering God's name. We have the third one about observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy. And so really those first three then focus exclusively on our relationship with God. And the remaining seven talk about our relationship with other people. So then we have the fourth commandment, which is about honoring our parents as well as authority. Fifth commandment is about murder, and now we are into the sixth commandment, which is on adultery. So just to begin, this is going to be a very interesting and as well just a very, for many people, life-changing topic, because in our culture out there, so much of our society, most people do not understand God's commandment on this. And also as a result, it's completely misunderstood. And for those who do know it, just simply choose to live differently. And unfortunately, many people just choose to live contrary to God's will and God's ways. And as a result, get hurt. And as a result, end up with tons and tons of consequences, which we're going to be talking about later. So whenever we look at this area of adultery, it's funny that some people talk about it like it's so complicated. Oh, the Sixth Commandment. Oh, it's so complicated. I can't possibly understand this. And so here's what's fun. I heard someone say this. So super simple. If you're married, you can't have sex. If you're married, then you can have sex under one condition: with the person that you're married to. And it really is that simple. That's how simple this commandment is. So it's funny that we make it so difficult, so complex, that we can't possibly understand it. It's super simple. But also, we have to understand this, that God has a plan for you. God has a plan for marriage and sexuality. And as a result of this plan that he has, we have to understand that Jesus said that he has come to give us life and life to its fullest. And so whenever we obey God, whenever we follow God and do it his way, that it is going to be so much better. You're going to be so much more blessed. Your life is going to be so much simpler. And as well, you're not going to have to deal with baggage. You're not going to have to deal with the consequences that are going to happen with some of these things that we're going to be talking about later. And so really, we have to understand that the whole Ten Commandments is not there just so that way we can't have fun. Some people think it's like that. Some people think that, oh man, life would be so much fun, but oh darn, we got these 10 commandments to follow. That's not it at all. What it is that God is giving us these commandments, showing us the best way to live. Because if it's true that God created everything, then he knows what's best, and he's providing that for us. And as well, he's giving us these commandments saying, here's how I want you to live. And so God's plan for marriage and sexuality can be found in the Bible, of all places. And in fact, especially Genesis 1, when God creates everything. Then Genesis 2, he creates the Garden of Eden for Adam and for Eve. He noticed that Adam was lonely. And so he put Adam to sleep. And then he took one of the ribs of Adam and he created Eve, this woman. And whenever Adam awoke, he saw her and said, "Whoa, man, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." And so right then we have, and then it says this, for this reason, now a man should leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. What God is doing here is he's instituting this thing of marriage. He's instituting sexuality that is within the boundaries of marriage between one man and one woman. And so that's what God's plan is. God is the one who created sex. God is the one who created all of this. And so as a result, sex is actually something that is good. Sex is actually something that God created, is God ordained, God instituted. But it is within the boundaries of marriage. And a lot of people look at that and they say, yeah, but so I have a girlfriend or I have a boyfriend, but you know, what if I just really love the person? Oh my gosh, I've heard people say that. Tons of teenagers say that. And hey, you know what? If you are in love, then that's great. God still says that thou shalt not commit adultery. Do not commit adultery. So sex outside of marriage is wrong. It's sinful. So yes, you may be in love, and that's great. But also, you're not married. So sex outside of marriage is a sin. So we have within the boundaries of marriage. And I just got to tell you that this is so true. Your life is going to be so much more blessed. Your marriage is going to be so much more blessed if you choose self-control and choose to wait until you're married to have sex. Your marriage is going to be so much better, I promise you. Think of it this way. So right now, we have the average, according to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and by the way, they study this stuff. You know why? Because, well, we're going to talk about STDs later. But the CDC says that in America, as of late, the number of sexual partners that someone will have before they get married, guess what number that is? 27. Ew, isn't that gross? It makes me want to buy a bottle of Purell and not touch anyone ever again because that number is just so gross. The number of people that are just carelessly taking this commandment that God has created around sexuality and boundaries and instituting within marriage. And people just take that and they just instead choose just to dishonor themselves, dishonor God, and just sleep around and hook up. And it's gross. We have apps today, such as Tinder, and I'm sure there's dozens others that are coming out that are just exclusively designed for hooking up and for one-night stands. Not even being in a relationship, but just one-night stands and hooking up. And that's how our culture is taking this. So imagine this. Imagine that we'll take two different scenarios just to show you how God's commandment is so good for you. Two different scenarios. Let's take one scenario where it is now your wedding day. Dun, dun, da, da, dun, dun, da, da. Okay, it is your wedding day, so either you're the bride walking down the aisle, or maybe you're the groom and you're up front in your rented tuxedo. All right, it is your day, the day that you have planned for it. And let's just say that both you and now your spouse-to-be have hit that statistic of 27 partners before marriage. That means that what you're now bringing into that marriage is 27 failed relationships because you've had to break up with them at this point, I assume, to get to where you're at. And so now you have baggage. Now you've got emotional stress. Now you have heartache. Now you have trust issues. Maybe you have abuse in the past. Maybe you've got all sorts of things that are going into now this relationship that you are bringing tons and tons of baggage, suitcases full of baggage that you're bringing into this marriage. Not to say that God cannot offer forgiveness, right? We go to God in confession, we repent, we receive forgiveness. Not to say that God can't do that. And also not to say that God cannot heal something that is very broken. However, I will say this, it's going to take a long, long time and a lot of big battles you're going to have to overcome to be able to trust your spouse and for your spouse to be able to trust you. Lots of really big battles to happen. Now, let's say that you have it's your marriage, and you have chosen self-control, and you have chosen now to save yourself until marriage, and now you walk down the aisle, or now you're at the front of the altar, and now you begin your relationship without any of that baggage, without any physical, emotional, or spiritual baggage and consequences that you've had to deal with. Your marriage is going to be so much better, so much more blessed as a result. So let's get into a few things here. And all of this we are talking about, if you choose to have sex outside of marriage, there are consequences. So again, God's way is best. If you choose to go your own way, there are consequences for it. So here, let's look at the first one. The first one here is that there are physical consequences. Physical consequences. And the first blank that we're going to look at here is the risk of STDs. Woohoo! Sexually transmitted diseases. So, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 high school students currently have an STD. Oh my gosh. 1 in 4 currently have an STD. So, sexually transmitted disease, for those of you who fell asleep in biology class, are just simply that. It's a disease, or now they also call them infections. I guess STI sounds better than STD, I don't know. But it's some sort of communicable disease that is transferred through bodily fluids, and so as a result they call them sexually transmitted, because that's often the primary, or in some cases the only way in which these diseases can be transmitted. And so as a result, there's tons of STDs out there. In fact, according to this, it says that 1 in 4 currently have an STD, and so it's not just have had an STD, but currently have, because there are over 30 STDs that are known, and I say that are known because, well, there's new ones developing all the time, and some of them you can simply go to the doctor, and I say simply, I mean, it's more than this, but you could go to the doctor, you could receive some medications, a shot of penicillin, a pill, something like that, and then over time it could eventually go away. And so now that disease, that infection has now left your body, and then now you don't have that STD anymore. It is possible. There are those out there that do that. However, there are 5 that are permanent, meaning that they are there with you forever, and no matter what you do, you cannot cure them. And some of these are deadly, and some of them as well can be undetected by an STD test. So for example, HPV, human papillomavirus, can actually go undetected for 7 years. So that means you could actually have HPV, and you could take an STD test and it's going to say negative, as in you have passed the STD test. So you walk out of the doctor's office with a high five and you're all good, you're all set, but guess what? Actually you do have it. And so if you are sexually active, every year you need to be taking an STD test. And then once you have stopped being sexually active, so if you've chosen, hey, I'm no longer going to do this, I'm going to wait until marriage, then every year you have to be retested up to 7 years to see if you do have HPV. One of the downsides to HPV as well is that for women, it causes something called infertility. And infertility means that you are then unable to conceive and unable to have a child. So let's talk about this for 1 second. Imagine that, so in your mind, you're just saying to yourself, okay, I'm just out, I'm just hooking up with whoever and whatever. But now that I've settled down, now I'm ready to get married. So you get married, and now I'm ready to have a child. And then you go into your doctor and you find out that you're unable to conceive and have a child because of something that you had chosen to do years ago, just messing around with your boyfriend or whoever. Just understand that this is a real thing. And this is why God's commandment is so darn important. Because if we would follow God in his ways, do you see how your life's going to be so much better? And I'm going into all this just because there's so many teenagers out there, so many young adults, so many people out there who say, I had no idea. If I would have known, then I would have chosen differently. So really, that's so much of what we're doing right now is just that. I'm just giving you information. I hope that you make the right choice, but honestly, I'm just giving you this information at this point. I don't want you to ever end up in a place where you just didn't know. So, STDs is one cause. And considering how rampant they are out there, it's amazing that people don't really fear them as much. But do you know what the number one fear is for teenagers who are sexually active? Of course, is pregnancy. That's right. The biggest fear for teenagers is to get pregnant because they think to themselves, oh man, a lot of difficult choices from here on out, which is absolutely true. There are very difficult choices whenever you get pregnant outside of wedlock. Now, in America, right now, there are a few different options that you could pursue that are all legal, all right? Now, I should tell you this, that not one of these choices is going to be easy. Even though that they might be legal, as in the law permits you to do these things, some of them are not moral, and some of them that are moral are also going to be very, very, very difficult for you physically and emotionally. So here we go. The first option that you have in America as of right now, according to our federal law, is you have the right to choose abortion. Now, as we had talked about this last time, we're going through the Fifth Commandment, certainly abortion is murder. And the reason that it's murder is because it is killing an innocent life. That's the definition of murder. Murder is not killing, it is killing an innocent life. And so a baby here clearly has the inability to defend itself, and clearly is clearly innocent in this. And so if you kill an innocent life, it is by definition murder. Now, how it is not considered by law to be murder absolutely escapes my mind. I have no idea why it is not classified as murder. There was a big lawsuit back in the 70s called Roe v. Wade, and Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. And you have to understand that in the 70s, at the time, they did not have the same medical technology that we do today. And so what's so crazy about this is that back then, they just kind of thought, well, yeah, the baby's in the womb somewhere, and they didn't really have all the medical technology to see. And so in the late 70s and early 80s, they developed something called ultrasound, where then they were able to, with a camera and live view, actually be able to see the baby in the womb. They're actually able to see the heartbeat. In fact, ultrasounds are so advanced now. We even have something called 4D technology, where, it is lifelike. You can see the baby. You can see the baby's face. You can see the baby's fingernails. You can see the heartbeat as young as 5 weeks now. You can see, in our case, we had little Hannah, and she was just doing flips inside of the womb. You could see all that lifelike baby. And for anyone to look at this baby who is inside the womb and to say, well, it's just a clump of cells, so it's not really life. It's just a bunch of nothing, is absolutely mind-boggling for me. Not only as a parent who got to experience this ultrasound and get to experience a pregnancy and a birth and so forth, but for anyone who has half a brain at all, just to look at this baby and say, well, instead the mother chooses to abort the baby. And I will say this, is that abortion seems like the easy way out. In fact, people even use phrases like, well, we're just going to take care of it, and we're just going to make it like it never happened. And that's absolutely selfish, because then you're putting your own needs above a baby's needs. It's absolutely the height of selfishness. It really is. And then as well, to talk just for a second about this area of abortion, is that it can also have some lasting physical consequences because the operation is so destructive towards, obviously, the baby, but can also be destructive towards the mother in the womb. And so what we have here is we have a baby who is being murdered all just because of our own selfishness, because of our own needs, because it's easier to go through life without having a baby. And what I would say to someone who's struggling with this is just to say, you know what? There are better options out there. There absolutely are way infinitely better options out there than abortion. And so, even though that it's legal, it is a sin. It is murder. The other option that you have, which is so much better than abortion, still really hard, is to raise the child. Raise the child. Now, I will say this about raising the child is that, well, it is certainly going to add difficulty to your life. Now, again, it's so much better that, hey, at least you didn't murder your baby, but you have to understand that your life is going to change by a little bit, and, well, okay, by a ton, by a lot. I can tell you that for our first child, I just remember staying up at night and the baby just screaming and screaming and screaming in my ear. And then the baby has a poopy diaper. And I just remember going to work just being like a zombie, just being sleep deprived. And then as well, oh, now I got to take the baby to childcare, and then wait, I can't go out with my friends because I got to do this. I'm just saying it's going to add complications to your life, and that's coming from me, from the guy. All right, from the mother, it's certainly that times 10. And so what I'm saying is that it's going to make your life a lot harder. I know babies are cute, and And there's so much joy when a woman gets pregnant, even as a teenager out of wedlock. There's so much joy that comes with a baby. But you have to also understand that it's a ton of work, and it's going to add complications to your life a little bit. Statistically, this is kind of interesting, is that 38% of teen moms graduate high school, which means that statistically here 62% do not. And so there's, I'm sure, several factors for that. But just to recognize that, yes, it statistically is going to make your life much more difficult. And as well, now if you're a guy and you're sitting there listening to all this and say pregnancy has nothing to do with me, well, guess what? It does. You know why? Because of, drum roll, hey, child support. That's right, child support. So congratulations, is that if you get a girl pregnant while you're in high school, for the next 18 years legally of your life, and well, probably in the next 35 years of your life, but legally the next 18 years of your life, you are going to be paying child support. And whether you like it or not. And so it depends upon how much money you make that you have to pay out. But as well, the government can take it directly out of your paycheck. So you don't even have a choice on whether you're paying child support. It just simply comes right out. Now, again, talking about this, you get a girl pregnant in high school. Now you're in college or you're a young adult and you're dating a girl, and you start to get serious. And by the way, just so you know, $1,000 a month from our finances that we're going to have as now maybe a new married couple, $1,000 a month has to go towards this child that I have, and who I may not even have custody with, I may never get to see, but I have to pay child support. Do you think that's going to complicate your life a little bit? Yeah, I think so too. So here's what I'm saying, is that pregnancy is, or if you choose to raise the child, it is absolutely a great thing. It is. But just understand that your life is going to get really complicated really quickly. Then the third option with pregnancy as a teenager is also very, very, very difficult, but as well as a great option. And it's this option of adoption. So what you can choose to do here with adoption is that you can actually choose to give what is called a private adoption. And so what you can choose to do is you can choose to, at the hospital, give birth to the child. So carry the baby the full 9 months, 40 weeks, and then to in the hospital then to be able to have the baby, and then give the baby up for adoption. And you can just simply call up an adoption agency even there in the hospital room. You could do that. Or you could work it out prior with an adoption agency. Or you could even find people. There's tons of people out there, tons and tons of married couples who would love nothing more than to adopt a baby. In fact, with the rate of STDs that are permanent and that cause infertility, and then as well the number of abortions that cause infertility, just throwing this out there, that there is a high number of people out there who are infertile and then get married and then in their 20s and 30s want to have a baby, are unable to, and now they've got careers and everything, and they would love nothing more than to adopt a baby. And so here's what I'm saying, is that there's a high need out there of people who want to adopt. And then for you, if you recognize that, hey, you know what, I don't want to abort the baby. Also, what I don't want to do is I am unable to raise this child. And you may come to that place. You may come to that point. Given your life situation and so forth, you may look at this child and say, you know what, this child would be better to live in someone else's home and be raised by someone else. Now, that is a very mature, but also a very difficult thing to come to grips with. And that may not be the case for you. It may not be the case for for your family, but it might be that case. And in fact, I can tell you just from a personal story here that we did adopt a child this way through private adoption, meaning not through the foster care system, but through a family who had the child and wished to adopt her. There were just some complications. There were some issues in their home and in their family that prohibited them from being able to effectively raise a child. Now, some of these things were pretty unhealthy. We're talking about things like, drug use. We're talking about things like just complete instability in their home. And so adoption for them was a great option, and it blessed us because now we were able to take this child in, and we were able to adopt her. And I just got to tell you, I thank God every day that she was not aborted, because I know that was an option, and that was something that they chose not to do. And they chose to not only give this baby life, but they also chose us to be able to raise this child for her. But the other thing too is that. That I vividly remember this, that we went into the courtroom, and so part of what had happened was, so the child was born, and then the parents had to sign over the rights to sever their rights is what it's called, meaning that they are giving this baby up for adoption. So they gave up their parental rights on the child. And so it's a very legal thing, and it wasn't a long thing, but they just had to go in and they had to sign. And then afterwards, with our adoption agency, we decided to do a little ceremony. And I just remember the father in particular holding the baby and then giving the baby to us. And he's a bigger guy than I am. I mean, muscular and everything. And he was just completely weeping, just completely crying and bawling, just because it's still just so difficult to be able to give a child out for adoption. Someone as a mother who you carried for 40 weeks, and then to be able to go through the birthing process, and then to give that baby up for adoption is just a very emotionally and otherwise just very difficult thing. And so I just simply say all that to say that adoption is a great option, but it's also just very, very, very difficult as well. I've heard stories where some people, mothers, whenever they birth a baby, they don't even want to meet their baby, because they know that even if they saw the baby's face or held the baby, they would not be able to go through with the adoption. And so just to fully recognize that as well. So, all right, all of this we have talked about physical consequences for if you choose to have sex outside of marriage. Now, let's talk real quickly about two others, and this will go by pretty quickly. One of them is emotional consequences, emotional. So here's the thing, is that not only can there be physical consequences that you deal with your body and so forth, but there are also emotional consequences where because sex is the most intimate way that two humans can connect. And that's how God intended it. God wanted sex to be in marriage as both a healing, to be a bonding way that the two can just become one, is what God says about it. And so because it's the highest level of intimacy, then ultimately what we have here is that any time that we have a breakup, so if you're sexually involved with someone and then you have that as a breakup, either you're the one instigating it or you're the one who's broken up, then guess what? You're going to have hurt feelings over that. Tons and tons and tons of hurt feelings. It's like the analogy that people will do is they'll get tape and put it on their arm and rip it off. And it's painful, and a part of you now is on the tape. A part of you is now with this other person, even though that you may never see them again. And a part of them is now with you. You have to understand that because it is the highest level of bond, of intimacy, to rip it apart is going to be extremely painful and excruciating. And so as a result, now if you were just to hold hands with that person, just to kiss them, not go too far with that person, then guess what? The even though that you're breaking up with them and that's painful, there's still not that bond that you guys shared that is now going to also have to be ripped apart. And so because of that, we experience emotional consequences. And then finally, we talk about spiritual consequences. Spiritual consequences. So here's the thing, is that for God, he tells us that anytime that we sin, that we try not to sin, all right? But there's times that we stumble and we fall and we sin. And whenever we sin, we go to God in confession. We go to him in repentance and say, God, I'm really sorry. And then we receive forgiveness because of Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. And that is beautiful, and that's a great thing. But here's what someone can do. This is especially true in a relationship with a girlfriend or boyfriend, because it's just a continual ongoing thing, is that someone can then say, you know what, God, I'm just going to choose to be sexually active with my girlfriend or boyfriend, and I'm just going to completely ignore you, God. And I'm just going to go do my own thing. And that's a very dark place to be at spiritually, because now you're choosing sin over God. It literally has now become your idol. Going back to the first commandment here, the thing that's more important to you than God, and now that's your centerpiece, and now you're using that as a wedge between you and God. So it can very much have spiritual consequences as well. So I'm gonna close actually with two other things that aren't on here. One of them is this area of lust, and especially this area of pornography. So one of the things that Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.'" And what he's quoting here is the 10 Commandments, everything we've been talking about today. But then he says this. He says that you have heard it said, "Do not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What he's talking about here is this area of lust. Guys and girls, all of us, we need to guard our hearts. All right, we need to guard our eyes. Job said that he's going to make a covenant with his eyes. And so guys and girls, I say guys like as a y'all kind of thing, everyone here, but people, middle schoolers, what we need to do is we need to guard ourselves against this area of lust. So we're going to have attractions, and the attraction part is not the sinful part, but it's whenever we lust after a person. It's whenever we start to use our imagination to think inappropriate or sinful thoughts, then that is lust, and that is sin. And especially this area of pornography is so rampant, especially with cell phones and certain websites. And so I will say this, is that, guys, guard yourselves against pornography. Absolutely. No matter what any of your friends say or whoever says, guard yourselves against pornography. In fact, one thing that you need to do is that if you are tempted, because now you have a phone and you can easily access the World Wide Web, you need to get a software on your phone that monitors and blocks and prevents you from getting onto those websites. And so you can totally do this, and your parents will totally get it for you, and they'll totally buy it for you. And I promise you, do it for you, all right? Even if your parents... for them, they might look at it and they may be trying to control your screen time or something like that. Allow it. Do it for you and for your heart, so that way you're never tempted to go into those websites. The other thing that I want to mention just real quickly is when we presented this live, we had a question about rape and sexual abuse. And so I want to say a couple of things. This will be our closing thing for this topic, is that we're talking about rape and sexual abuse. So everything that we've talked about today has been in this area of you choosing. All right, so this is for you to consent to want to have sex outside of marriage. So that's with your girlfriend or boyfriend, that's all that we're talking about today. The area of sexual abuse, however, is much different. It's whenever you don't want to enter into a sexual relationship and someone then abuses and forces that onto you. And if that's the case, then I just want you to know a couple things. Number one is that it's not your fault. I know that because of that, sometimes people feel shame and they'll start to blame themselves. And don't, because it is not your fault. It is entirely the person who, if you're saying no, if you're saying stop, and you're not desiring this, then it is not your fault. Instead, it is entirely the person who is abusing you. So I want you to know that. The other thing I want you to know is that I want to give you permission to speak out. And so really come to someone such as myself or Pastor Mike or to your parents. I'm telling you, your parents need to be brought in on this. Your parents, you may think to yourselves, no way am I telling my parents. Yes, you need to tell your parents. Get your parents involved. Get a teacher who at school. Get someone who is an adult who is safe to talk to about this. I need you to speak out, not only to protect yourself, but also to protect others. And then as well, just depending, if it's soon enough, you could even go to the hospital and they could, maybe do some things there as well to be able to try to identify the person, even so you may not be able to identify who that person is. So here's what I'm saying in all this, is that I'm saying that it's not your fault. and then as well that you need to speak out, and then as well to get to a place eventually, as hard as this is to forgive the other person, even if they're not sorry, just so that way you're at a place where you're emotionally being able to move on and to work through that hurt. So give you all these things, but so much of what we had talked about today was consensual, you choosing to have sex outside of God's boundaries. And as we had talked about, there are several things that if you choose to do that, it will make your life so much more complicated. So, all right, well, thanks for joining us today.